Today, on How-Tos and Reviews with Booze, we'll be showing you how to rebuild your calipers so that you too can do it yourself.
Today, we're going to show you how to rebuild your calipers like this, after looking like they were just picked out of a junkyard like this. So these calipers are off of a 2001 Toyota Sequoia. The stamping on them is S13WE, as you can see on the side. And they are also found on, I believe, the 2000, 2001, and some 2002 Toyota Tundras. Same years for the Sequoias. The part number for it would be 536-601-63L and 536-601-62R. Now the main thing you're going to need is the caliper rebuild kit. This is going to be all the little rubber grommets and seals that go inside the caliper itself that will keep all the fluid from leaking out and causing your brakes to fail. You can see the part number right there. I'm not going to read every single part number out. Just pause the video, write it down if you need to, but that's the main one that you're going to need. Now for this particular Toyota setup and for this part number, that includes enough to do both of these calipers. Do not be an idiot and buy two, like I did. Now a lot of times you won't need these other parts. You can get away with reusing the ones that are on the caliper to begin with, but just in case they're a little bit rusted out and you're trying to replace everything, you've got the center spring, which is that part number, the retaining spring for the guide rods themselves, the shim kit to go behind the brake pads, and the brake pads themselves. And finally, you'll probably need a little brake caliper grease, some brake clean, an air compressor, and a pick tool. As always, we're going to be pairing today's how-to with a little bit of booze, and today I've chosen Fegley's Brewworks Bourbon Barrel Insidious, and this is an Imperial Stout. It's an ale that's actually aged in bourbon barrels. It's made in Allentown, PA. Got a 9% ABV, so that should be fun to pair this one with today. I've actually never had this one before, so I'm pretty excited. Now I chose this beer today because it says it's aged in bourbon barrels, and it just kind of reminded me of the calipers because I'm sure the pistons in there have been quite well aged at this point. And they describe this beer as, to cast the spell, we squeeze the life from the malts and roasted barley, boil their spirits with an East Kent Golding hops, unleash an English ale yeast to feast upon it, and finally lock their remains in charred oak bourbon barrels. What emerges is a black deity-sized libation that will be your portal to the dark side. So I am definitely even more excited now. Yeah, that is really good. You could definitely taste the bourbon barrel in there. Now that we have a little bit to drink, let's get into this how-to. So first we're just going to start taking everything apart before we clean it all up. And we're going to start with this spring here. Just grab your pick tool, start from the one side, pops right out. Get the other side. And then if you just pinch and kind of push down towards the center of the brake, you'll see that eventually. So there you go. Once that one out, and you got that spring right there. So again, just grab your pick tool, pull up on the one side. I guess that works. And these guide pins actually are coming out pretty much just by being able to press them. You can see there. So we're just going to keep working them. can see these pins, not in the worst of condition, don't necessarily need to be replaced, but for $5 in parts, certainly not a bad idea either. Now at this point, all you'll need to do is just slide the brake pads right out. And we are free. So now that you have most of the caliper disassembled, you could either go straight into the rest of the rebuild, or you could give it a quick spit shine and throw some paint on it, which obviously I did. If you want to freshen up yours as well, check out my video on how to paint calipers, which will be linked in the description below. So this might seem a little daunting at first, but I can assure you it's a really straightforward and easy repair. This particular caliper is a 4-piston caliper. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on each caliper. So you've got a total of 8 that you're going to have to do between the two of them. For each piston that's in here, there's really only a couple of pieces that you're going to need to replace. So as you're looking at this, you've got, it's kind of hard to see because of all the crud that's on it, but there is a little silver ring that runs around that boot. And the silver rings are in the rebuild kit. You've got the boots themselves that fit around the piston. And then inside the actual caliper right here where the piston sits, there is a square cut seal that looks like this. You can see it's perfectly square cut that sits on the inside. And that will basically seal in all of the brake fluid and prevent it from leaking out. As you take these apart, you really want to pay attention to the condition of the pistons. You want to make sure that there's no scoring or gouges or anything on the sides that would cause any leaks to occur. Just from looking at these calipers, it doesn't look like there's been any leaks. There's no real indications of fluid leaking out or anything like that. So hopefully we'll be able to get through this without having to replace any of those. So first you want to grab your pick tool and just work off the ring and the boot. Don't worry about scratching up anything on the boot itself. We're going to be replacing these because the new ones come as part of the kit. Definitely make sure not to mess up the piston though. And then just start on the second one and keep working your way around. Now at this point, we're going to lay the calipers down and we're going to put a scrap piece of wood between the pistons. And we're going to remove the little cap where the brake line is attached to the caliper. Now I did need to use a little bit of PB Blaster just to loosen up the pistons a little bit from the caliper. Now there's a couple of different methods to get the pistons out of the caliper. The first one we're going to be trying is by applying forced air through that port where the brake line is attached to the caliper. So all you need to do is start up your air compressor, start off with maybe 25 to 35 psi, put it right into the hole there, give it a little blast of air, and you can already see every single one of the pistons is starting to push out. Now you can see I wrapped the tip of this nozzle here with a little bit of electrical tape. That way it was just a little bit more airtight, and it allowed me to sort of control how much pressure I was putting into that port. Now a couple things you're going to find as you're doing this. Number one, it's going to be very messy. If there's any brake fluid that's still in the caliper as you're applying the pressure, it's going to not only come out that port, but it's also going to come out from wherever the piston comes out. The other thing you're going to find is that not all pistons want to come out at the same time or at the same rate. The left side here actually came out much smoother and quicker than the right side did. So now what I'm doing is clamping these down so that I can still have enough air pressure to push out the other two. When you're doing this, you can't just take out one at a time. You need all of them to have pressure applied to them and have it sealed up so that when the air circulates through, it can still press out the other sides. So if this one or this one were out of the system, I wouldn't be able to push those two out. And I'll just show you what that looks like as you apply the air pressure to it. And because they end up popping out at different times, you're probably going to end up needing C-clamps and different pieces of wood and kind of reorganizing them in different ways. Right now, this back one, and this front one have all been freed enough to the point where I can take them out by hand. And right now I've got the C-clamps on these to keep them in there, to keep all the air pressure still active in the system. This one is actually also being held by this. And now I'm going to work on getting this one out by applying some more air pressure. And after they get loose enough, you'll be able to pop them out just like that. And now you are left with the calipers and the pistons. Now you can see the pistons definitely need to be cleaned up quite a bit. We're going to try and get all that crud and dirt off of there. And that cylinder wall itself is what we need to really inspect carefully and make sure that there's no big gouges or scratches or anything like that. If there are, then what will happen is the fluid will be able to leak out from the sides between that piston and the calipers in there. Next, you're going to need to remove the square cut gasket that's on the inside of the cylinder, and you can actually see it right here. You've got the cylinder wall, then the square cut gasket, and then back to the cylinder wall again. Now you want to be really careful to not scratch up the cylinder wall itself. Again, that will cause a leak from the brakes. However, for the square cut gasket, you don't need to be too gentle with it because you are going to be replacing that. We've got the first one freed up. It just pops right out. Second one. Third. And fourth. And complete for both calipers. Now that both calipers are completely apart, enjoy another sip of your beverage because you're halfway there. Next, we're going to be cleaning and inspecting each one of these pistons to make sure that they're all in good shape to go back into the freshly rebuilt caliper. And what you're trying to get is for this to look like this. What you're going to want to do is use some brake cleaner and an old t-shirt and some plastic tools. This right here is just a plastic bristled brush, and then I've got a little interior trim removal piece tool right here. This is really good to just run over the piston just to make sure that everything's nice and smooth, and if there's any pieces of crud that are harder to get up, it's good at sort of chiseling those away. But say it with me, guys. Cotton and plastic. You do not want to be touching this with any sort of a wire wheel or any of those scrub pads, those metal scrub pads, because it is just going to score the shit. And it's going to cause problems later on when you go to install it because the brake fluid will be able to seep out in between that square cut gasket and the cylinder wall. When you're cleaning and inspecting these, really what you're going for is for the entire thing here to be nice and smooth and shiny, free of any crud. Same with the lip right there and the other lip at the top. Now you can see the sides, the very top here, and the inside of the piston I haven't really cleaned out. The reason is that that is actually the part that's going to be pushing against the shim at the back of the brake pad. So it's literally going to be getting dirty the very moment that you put this on the car and you start driving. So just make sure that it's nice and flat and smooth. You don't want like a really large buildup of crud on one side because that's going to make it push on the brake pad at a weird angle. So just make sure that everything's nice and smooth there. Everything's nice and smooth around the very, side of the lip. But on the inside, where the boot is going to be attaching or resting, you want to make sure that that's completely free of any crud. You want to make sure that there's no large gouges, any cracks, any nonsense going on with the piston. And this one is good to go. Once all the pistons have been cleaned and inspected, now we can move on to cleaning the calipers themselves. For this part, you basically just want to squirt a little bit of the brake cleaner inside each one of the cylinders and clean it out with your plastic bristle brush. So when you're done cleaning, the cylinder walls should look something like this, or hopefully even a little bit better. Again, these calipers were taken off of an old Sequoia, so definitely was not expecting perfection when I opened it up. And you can see there's still a little bit of stuff in the back there. However, everything is smooth. There's no gouges in the cylinder walls. And most importantly, this channel right here has been cleaned up exceptionally well. You want it to have your replacement square cut seals go directly in there, and if there's any particulate or any rust or grime, it's going to prevent that seal from holding in the fluid, and you're going to get a leak. After everything is apart, clean, and dry, you can finally start with the reassembly. First order of business is going to be getting these square cut gaskets back into the little channel inside the caliper. So in this little pack, they actually give you a little bit of grease, and you just want to put a very small amount on these square cut gaskets before you install them. A lot of times the factory will pre-grease them, but in this case these are pretty dry, so we're just going to apply a little bit. And now you can start snapping them in place. Want to make sure it's nice and smooth all the way around. You don't want this ring to twist like that. So you just kind of inlay it, push in the top part, run your finger around it, and you can kind of hear it just snaps right in. Next, we're going to start getting these pistons back in the calipers, but first, a little bit of grease. And then start sliding them back in. And you want to make sure that they're going in nice and square. You don't want them going off to the side or anything. And when you first put them in, don't worry about pushing them too far back. In fact, you don't want to, because in the next step, when we put the boot on, it's going to make it a little bit easier if you have a little bit of this left. So maybe push it in a couple centimeters or like a quarter inch or so, and then take the next step from there. Now with all the pistons back in the calipers, we can start getting the boots on. Again, we're going to be breaking out the grease, and we're going to be applying it to the inside of the inner ring and a little bit on the inside of the boot. And then we're just going to slip the boot right over the lip. And we're going to make sure that that's seated all the way around. Then you're going to pull this boot back over that lip right there. And when you're done, it'll look like this. Double, triple, quadruple check that all of the lips on the cylinder wall and the boot are lined up correctly, because you do not want any dirt getting in there and causing a leak once it gets in contact with the piston and starts to scour it. And now all you have to do is slip that little ring over the piston, over the boot, and into that little groove at the very top. And now with all the rings back on, you can go ahead and use hand pressure to push all of the pistons back into place. Now with the pistons pushed back in, we'll have more than enough space to put in the shim kit, the brake pads, the guide pins, the retaining clips, and then finally get it back onto the car. Now on these brake pads, you can see there's actually two little dimples in the back of the plate. That is where you're going to be putting some of this brake shim kit grease, and that goes in between that part and these two right here. Now in this particular kit, this piece would sit down on that and then goes in like that. The guide rod pins are going to be going through those holes right there. Now that the grease is on, we can just lay down the backing plate. Now take your guide rod pins and add a little bit of that caliper grease. Now get your brake pad lined up. And slide your pins through. Once you get them to about halfway, grab the other brake pad and finish it off. Now grab the longer clip that holds in those guide rods, and you're going to want to turn these so that you can put the clip into the eye at the end. Now I got it on the one side. We're going to line it up in this center hole. Finally, install the spring that goes in the center. Now with this one, you're going to want to pinch it together again. Fish the one side down and through. And then from there, all you need to do is get that into that little hole, and that into that little hole. Like so. Then pull on the center part to make sure that the wired part is wrapped nicely around. And that's it. You are officially finished. So now go back to enjoying your beer. Or if you're feeling really industrious, you can put them back on the car, and if you are, check out my video on how to replace calipers and rotors. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, post any comments or emotional outbursts below, and I'll see you guys next time on How-Tos and Reviews with Booze.